Imagine an island where ancient warriors clashed with invaders, forging legends in misty valleys and atop rugged cliffs. A land where famine struck with merciless force, the potato blight starving millions and sending waves of people across the world. Where a bitter partition carved the island in two, igniting decades of struggle, hope and heartbreak. Yet, from the ashes, Ireland rose, emerging as a beacon of peace, unity and prosperity for a new era. This is Ireland, a land of legends, rebellions and resilience, where every stone and story echoes with the spirit of its people. But how did this remarkable journey unfold through the centuries? Stay with us as we dive deep into the sweeping saga of Ireland's history, its triumphs, its trials and its transformation. From the ancient mists of prehistory to the vibrant miracles of today, every chapter awaits discovery. So let's begin our journey across time, across Ireland. The story starts now. To understand Ireland is to understand a story etched into its very landscape. Every rolling green hill, every stone wall, every ruined castle has a tale to tell. Over the next 30 minutes we will embark on an epic journey. From the first settlers who braved the wild Atlantic, through the age of high kings and English conquest, to the devastating famine that changed the world, and the bitter struggle for independence that forged a modern nation. We will uncover how this small island produced a culture so powerful it influenced the entire globe. Our story begins in the mists of prehistory. Around 8000 BC, during the Mesolithic era, the first humans arrived in Ireland, likely hunter-gatherers crossing land bridges from Britain or boating from Europe. They lived simply, fishing and foraging in a post-Ice Age landscape. By 4000 BC, the Neolithic period brought farming revolutions. Settlers built massive megalithic tombs like Newgrange, older than the pyramids, and aligned with the winter solstice. Imagine, these stone passage tombs were engineering marvels hinting at complex spiritual beliefs. Then came the Bronze Age around 2000 BC with metalworking and trade, but the real game changer, the Iron Age Celts arriving around 600 BC. These Indo-European warriors brought Hallstatt culture, iron weapons, chariots, and a rich oral tradition of myths. Ireland became a patchwork of tribal kingdoms ruled by high kings at Tara. Speaking of myths, let's detour into the legendary Tuatha De Danann, godlike beings in the ancient cycles. Stories of heroes like Cuchulainn in the Ulster cycle blend history with fantasy, influencing everything from Tolkien to modern fantasy. Were they based on real Celts? Likely a mix, preserving pre-Christian lore? Around 432 AD, Christianity arrived with St. Patrick, a British slave turned missionary. He didn't really drive out snakes, Ireland had none post-Ice Age, but he converted kings and fused Celtic paganism with the new faith. Monasteries like Clonmacnoise became Europe's learning hubs, saving classical knowledge during the Dark Ages. Remember that open loop about the Romans? They called Ireland Hibernia but never invaded, too remote and stormy. This spared Ireland the empire's fall, allowing a unique golden age of scholarship. But peace was fragile. Vikings were coming, setting up an open loop for invasion eras ahead. How would these isolated monks fare against seafaring raiders? We'll pay that off next. The late 8th century. A new terror descends upon Ireland's shores. In 795 AD, the first Viking longships appear, their dragon prows a fearsome omen. These were raiders launching swift, brutal attacks on Ireland's wealthy and undefended monasteries. They came for gold, silver, and human cargo, captured and sold into slavery, but raiding soon gave way to settlement. The Vikings established fortified coastal bases, or long forts, which evolved into Ireland's first towns. The most significant was built on the River Liffey, at a dark tidal pool the Irish called Dublin. This settlement, Dublin, became the heart of a vast trade network connecting Scandinavia to the wider world. Over the next 2 centuries, the lines blurred. The Norse settlers intermarried with the Gaelic Irish, creating a unique Hiberno-Norse culture, a volatile mix of alliance, trade, and warfare. Meanwhile, Irish monks waged a battle for preservation. They built stone round towers as lookouts and heroically hid treasures like the Book of Kells, its breathtaking pages a defiant testament to learning in an age of chaos. Out of this fragmentation rose a figure of legend, Brian Boru. Not born to the high kingship, Brian was a brilliant strategist who clawed his way to the top, subduing rivals to be recognized as High King of Ireland. In 1014, he confronted a rebellious coalition of Leinster and Dublin Viking forces at the Battle of Clontarf. It was a crushing victory, but a Pyrrhic one. Brian was slain as the battle ended, and with him died the dream of a unified Gaelic Ireland. This power vacuum set the stage for the next great upheaval. In 1169, the exiled Irish king, Diarmait Mac Murchada, invited Anglo-Norman mercenaries to help him regain his throne. Led by the formidable Strongbow, these knights brought a new form of warfare, heavy cavalry, skilled archers, and rapid castle building. Diarmait won back his kingdom, but he had unleashed a force he could not control. The Normans were here to stay. Alarmed that Strongbow might create a rival kingdom, England's King Henry II arrived in 1171. He asserted his authority, was declared Lord of Ireland, and formally linked the island to the English crown. The Normans built imposing stone castles, symbols of their feudal power. Yet, over generations, these conquerors assimilated, marrying into Gaelic families and adopting Irish customs, famously becoming more Irish than the Irish themselves. This created a deep cultural clash, especially in law. Pre-Norman Ireland used the ancient Brecon laws, a civil code emphasizing restitution over punishment. It was remarkably progressive, granting women rights to own property and seek divorce. This stood in stark contrast to the rigid feudal law of the Normans, where power flowed from the king. The two systems were incompatible, fueling centuries of tension. By the 1400s, English authority had collapsed outside a fortified strip of land around Dublin known as the Pale. Beyond it, a Gaelic resurgence flourished. But a new English dynasty, the Tudors, saw this independent, Gaelicized Ireland as a direct threat. A full-scale reconquest was coming, setting the stage for the most brutal chapter yet in the clash of cultures. The English crown's control was long limited to a small area around Dublin known as the Pale. But this changed dramatically in the 16th century. The Tudors, Henry VIII, Elizabeth I, saw Catholic Ireland as a potential backdoor for their European enemies. Their solution was twofold: conquest and conversion. They imposed Protestantism as the state religion, a move deeply resisted by the devoutly Catholic population. Alongside this came the policy of plantation, a systematic strategy of confiscating land from Gaelic lords and planting it with loyal English and Scottish Protestants to secure English rule. The Irish did not submit quietly. Rebellions like the Desmond Wars in Munster were brutally crushed. The greatest challenge to English authority came with the 9 Years' War, a nationwide conflict led by the brilliant Ulster chieftains Hugh O'Neill and Red Hugh O'Donnell. But after a devastating defeat at Kinsale in 1601, the rebellion collapsed. The consequences were catastrophic for the old Gaelic order. In 1607, facing the complete loss of their power, O'Neill and nearly 100 other Gaelic lords fled Ireland in the Flight of the Earls. This event marked the death of the old Gaelic aristocracy and left Ulster, the most defiantly Irish part of the island, leaderless and vulnerable. This power vacuum paved the way for the most ambitious project of all, the plantation of Ulster. The native Irish were displaced, pushed onto barren land, while hundreds of thousands of acres were given to Protestant settlers. It was here that the deep divisions between the dispossessed Catholic Irish and the new Protestant settlers were cemented. This planted seeds for modern troubles. If the Tudor conquest was a slow burn, the mid-17th century brought an explosion of violence. Oliver Cromwell's 1649 invasion was brutal. His campaign to crush Irish Catholic resistance was seen as both military necessity and divine punishment. The massacres at Drogheda and Wexford, where his army slaughtered thousands of soldiers and civilians, became infamous acts of terror designed to break the Irish will to resist. Following the military conquest came a social revolution. The Cromwellian settlement initiated the largest land confiscation in Irish history, forcing Catholic landowners to Hell or to Connaught, west to barren lands, while their estates were given to English soldiers and investors. By 1700, the conquest was secured by the penal laws, a system of institutionalized discrimination. Protestants, a small minority, now owned 85% of the land. Catholics were barred from power, education, and inheritance, creating a society of profound and legally enforced inequality. For the Protestant ascendancy, the 18th century was a golden age. Dublin was transformed into one of Europe's grandest capitals, its elegant Georgian boom a testament to their wealth. But this glittering surface masked a dark reality. In the countryside, resentment simmered, and secret societies like the White Boys fought back against evictions and unfair rents, a desperate expression of a people with no legal means of redress. Tangent/side section, the Irish Enlightenment. Paradoxically, this era of oppression also produced a brilliant flowering of intellectual life. Figures like Jonathan Swift in his savage satire A Modest Proposal condemned the English rule that was devastating the Irish poor. Philosophers like George Berkeley and political theorists like Edmund Burke advanced ideas that would echo across the globe. Ireland wasn't just oppressed, it contributed to global thought. Hutcheson's radical ideas on liberty were studied closely by America's founding fathers. In this way, Ireland, a nation under colonial rule, became an unlikely intellectual wellspring for the American Revolution. This era of conquest forged a fractured society, one of landlords and tenants, Protestant and Catholic, colonizer and colonized. The seeds of conflict, planted over centuries, were now deeply rooted in the Irish soil. How would this simmering resentment boil over? Famine and nationalism await. The 19th century dawned on an Ireland stripped of its autonomy. The 1801 Act of Union, a direct response to the 1798 rebellion inspired by revolutionary France, abolished the Irish Parliament. In reality, this parliament had been an exclusive club for the Protestant ascendancy, but its dissolution symbolized a total transfer of power. Ireland was now to be ruled directly from London, its interests managed by a parliament where its representatives were a permanent, often ignored minority. This political subjugation was built on a foundation of sectarianism, deepening the disenfranchisement of the Catholic majority, who were still shackled by the legacy of the penal laws. Into this landscape of simmering resentment stepped Daniel O'Connell, a brilliant Catholic lawyer who would earn the title the Liberator. Rejecting violence, O'Connell pioneered a new form of resistance: mass democratic politics. He mobilized the disenfranchised masses through the Catholic Association, ingeniously funded by the Catholic Rent, a subscription of a penny a month that gave even the poorest a stake in their own liberation. His legendary monster meetings saw hundreds of thousands gather peacefully to demand their rights. The campaign's climax came in 1828 when O'Connell won a parliamentary seat but was barred from taking it due to his faith. The crisis forced a reluctant British government to pass the Catholic Relief Act of 1829, a monumental crack in the edifice of sectarian rule. By the 1840s, the social structure of rural Ireland had become dangerously fragile. A rapidly growing population of poor tenant farmers had been pushed onto smaller and smaller plots of land where only one crop could provide enough sustenance: the potato. For nearly a third of the population, it was not just a staple, but their food. In 1845, a mysterious blight, a fungus called that had traveled from North America, arrived in Ireland. It swept across the country with terrifying speed. Farmers watched in horror as healthy green fields turned into a black, stinking, inedible mush within days. The foundation of Irish life had crumbled into dust. What followed was a catastrophe of biblical proportions. The Great Famine, or Angorta Mór, laid waste to Ireland for 7 agonizing years. It was a slow, torturous death. Starvation was only part of the horror. Weakened bodies fell prey to diseases like typhus, dysentery, and relapsing fever, which tore through the population. The government's workhouses, intended as a last resort, became death traps. Over 1 million people, 1/8 of the entire population, perished from hunger and disease. Entire villages were wiped from the map, leaving behind only silent, ghostly ruins. The British government's response remains one of the most controversial aspects of the tragedy. Officials like Charles Trevelyan were bound by a rigid ideology of laissez-faire, believing that interfering with the market would only worsen the crisis. They viewed the famine as an act of God, an opportunity to reform the supposedly flawed Irish character. While Ireland starved, vast quantities of grain, meat, and butter continued to be exported from its ports to pay landlords' rents, often under armed guard. This image of food leaving a starving country became an unforgivable symbol of British indifference. The relief that did come was often too little, too late, with private charities like the Quakers doing more effective work than the state. The famine also triggered a cataclysmic wave of emigration. For 2 million people, the only choice was to flee. Leaving was a death of its own. Families held American wakes to mourn those they would never see again. They packed onto overcrowded, disease-ridden vessels, soon known as coffin ships, where mortality rates could be as high as 30%. The voyages were nightmares of filth, hunger, and sickness. Those who survived the crossing often arrived destitute and ill, facing yet more hardship in quarantine stations before they could even begin their new lives. This exodus created a vast and profoundly wounded Irish diaspora. In America, the Irish were met not with open arms but with suspicion and open hostility. Anti-Catholic prejudice was rampant, and signs reading "No Irish Need Apply" were common, but they endured. They clustered in tight-knit urban communities where the Catholic Church provided a powerful social anchor. They took the hardest, most dangerous jobs, building the canals, mines, and railroads that powered America's industrial growth. And they learned to master the game of urban politics, using their numbers to build powerful political machines and create dynasties that would, in time, reach the White House itself with the Kennedys. Back in Ireland, the famine had shattered any remaining faith in British rule and constitutional politics. The memory of starvation amidst plenty fueled a new, more radical nationalism. In 1858, the Irish Republican Brotherhood, known as the Fenians, was founded. It was a secret, oath-bound society with a single, uncompromising goal: to establish an Irish republic through armed rebellion. With strong support from the diaspora in America, they attempted a rising in 1867. Though it failed, its martyrs became legendary figures, cementing the ideal of a republic achieved by physical force. In the 1870s, a new champion emerged who would fuse constitutional and revolutionary tactics: Charles Stewart Parnell. A Protestant landowner, he became the unlikely, uncrowned King of Ireland. In Westminster, his disciplined Irish parliamentary party used aggressive obstructionist tactics, grinding the business of the British Empire to a halt to force the Irish question of home rule, a devolved Irish parliament, onto the agenda. Back in Ireland, Parnell allied with the Land League in a bitter struggle against landlordism known as the Land War. Using rent strikes and the newly invented tactic of the boycott, they fought for the rights of tenant farmers, fundamentally reshaping Irish society. As the century drew to a close, the political battle was joined by a cultural one. A sense that Ireland's unique identity was being eroded by Anglicization sparked a powerful cultural revival. The Gaelic Athletic Association, founded in 1884, revived and promoted traditional Irish sports like hurling and Gaelic football. The Gaelic League, founded in 1893, fought to save the Irish language from extinction. This cultural nationalism, alongside the literary revival led by figures like W.B. Yeats, forged a new, confident, and distinctly Irish identity. But as the dream of home rule finally seemed within reach, it was met by the unyielding opposition of Ulster Unionists. Predominantly Protestant and fiercely identifying as British, they feared becoming a minority in a Catholic-led state, famously declaring "Home rule is Rome rule." Led by Sir Edward Carson, they pledged to resist, signing the Ulster Covenant and forming their own militia, the Ulster Volunteer Force. Nationalists responded by forming the Irish Volunteers to defend home rule. As the 19th century ended, Ireland stood on a precipice, armed and divided, setting the stage for a bloody revolutionary 20th century. As the 20th century dawned, Ireland was a nation on a knife's edge. The promise of home rule, a form of self-governance within the British Empire, was finally within reach. But the outbreak of World War I in 1914 changed everything. The British government, needing to focus on the war in Europe, suspended the Home Rule Act, asking Irish nationalists to wait. Mainstream leaders like John Redmond encouraged Irishmen to enlist, believing their loyalty would be rewarded after the war. But for a radical minority, this delay was the ultimate betrayal. They believed in the old Fenian proverb, "England's difficulty is Ireland's opportunity." While hundreds of thousands of Irishmen fought in the trenches of France and Belgium, a small group of revolutionaries planned to strike a blow for absolute independence. On Easter Monday, 1916, they seized their moment. Around 1,200 rebels, led by the poet and schoolteacher Patrick Pearse and the socialist James Connolly, took over key buildings in Dublin, centering their command at the General Post Office. From its steps, Pearse read the Proclamation of the Irish Republic, a revolutionary document declaring a sovereign, independent state and guaranteeing religious and civil liberty, equal rights, and equal opportunities to all its citizens. The public was initially confused, even hostile. The rebellion seemed doomed from the start. The might of the British Empire descended on Dublin, and after 6 days of brutal fighting that left much of the city centre in ruins, the rebels surrendered. The rising was crushed in days. In the immediate aftermath, it was seen as a failure. But then came the British reaction. Instead of leniency, the British military command ordered secret court-martials and began a series of slow, drawn-out executions. Over 2 weeks, 15 leaders of the rising were shot by firing squad. This act of retribution transformed public opinion overnight. The failed rebels were now martyrs. The executions made their cause heroic, galvanizing a generation and turning a military defeat into a stunning political victory. This shift was confirmed in the 1918 general election. The old Irish Parliamentary Party was wiped out, replaced by the radical Sinn Féin Party, which had been wrongly blamed for the rising but now embraced its legacy. Sinn Féin's elected members refused to go to the British Parliament. Instead, they established their own independent Irish Parliament in Dublin, the Dáil Éireann, and once again declared Ireland a republic. That home rule loop, it was now broken, evolving into the brutal 1919 to 1921 War of Independence. This was a new kind of conflict. The Irish Republican Army, or IRA, led by the brilliant and ruthless strategist Michael Collins, waged a guerrilla war. Collins pioneered intelligence networks and urban assassination squads, targeting British officials and police. In the countryside, flying columns of IRA volunteers ambushed British patrols, disappearing back into the supportive local population. Britain responded with force, deploying the infamous Black and Tans and the auxiliaries, paramilitary police units known for their brutal reprisals against civilians. The war descended into a vicious cycle of assassinations, ambushes, and reprisals, leaving a deep scar on the nation. By 1921, both sides were exhausted, leading to a truce and negotiations in London. The resulting Anglo-Irish Treaty was a deeply controversial compromise. It granted 26 of Ireland's 32 counties self-governance as the Irish Free State, a dominion within the British Empire similar to Canada or Australia, but it came at a huge cost. The treaty required Irish parliamentarians to swear an oath of allegiance to the British monarch, and most contentiously, it formalized the partition of the island. The 6 counties of Ulster with a Protestant Unionist majority would remain part of the United Kingdom as Northern Ireland. For Michael Collins, who signed it, the treaty was not ultimate freedom but the freedom to achieve freedom. For others, led by Sinn Féin leader Eamon de Valera, it was a profound betrayal of the Republic declared in 1916. The Dáil ratified the treaty by a razor-thin margin, and the Republican movement split in two. The result was the Irish Civil War of 1922 to 1923, a short but exceptionally bitter conflict that pitted former comrades against each other. Pro-treaty forces forming the new National Army fought the anti-treaty IRA, or irregulars. The war's legacy of division would define Irish politics for decades. Its greatest tragedy was the death of Michael Collins, ambushed and killed by anti-treaty forces in his native county Cork. The architect of independence was dead, a victim of the very divisions his compromise had created. The pro-treaty side won the Civil War, but it was the anti-treaty leader, Eamon de Valera, who would dominate the new state's politics. After a brief time in the political wilderness, he founded a new party, Fianna Fáil, and came to power in 1932. Over the next decade, his government systematically dismantled the treaty. He abolished the Oath of Allegiance and marginalized the British Governor-General. His crowning achievement was the 1937 Constitution, Bunreacht na hÉireann, which renamed the state Éire and effectively established it as a republic in all but name, with a president instead of a king. This constitution also laid claim to the entire island of Ireland, a symbolic but powerful declaration. When World War II erupted, Éire declared a policy of neutrality, a definitive assertion of its independence from Britain. Finally, in 1949, the state formally declared itself the Republic of Ireland, severing its last link to the Commonwealth. But while the South forged its own path, the partition of 1921 had created a powder keg in the North. For 50 years, Northern Ireland was a one-party state where the Catholic nationalist minority faced systemic discrimination in jobs, housing, and voting. Inspired by the American Civil Rights Movement, a new generation of activists began demanding reform in the late 1960s. They organized peaceful marches demanding one man, one vote, and an end to discrimination. But their protests were often met with police brutality and violent attacks from loyalist extremists who saw the movement as a front for the IRA and a threat to their British identity. The situation spiraled into a 30-year conflict known as the Troubles. The British Army was deployed in 1969, but soon became seen as an occupying force by nationalists. The Provisional IRA launched a deadly campaign of bombings and shootings to force a British withdrawal and unite Ireland. Loyalist paramilitary groups like the UVF and UDA responded with their own sectarian killings. The conflict claimed over 3,500 lives. Events like Bloody Sunday in 1972, when British paratroopers shot 26 unarmed civilians during a protest march, killing 14, became infamous symbols of the violence and injustice. Figures like Bobby Sands, an IRA hunger striker who was elected to the British Parliament before dying in 1981, embodied the deep-seated passions and tragic sacrifices of the era. The pain and turmoil of this era echoed through Irish culture. Music from U2, with songs like Sunday Bloody Sunday and the Cranberries' haunting anthem Zombie, captured the era's anguish and frustration for a global audience. The poetry of Nobel laureate Seamus Heaney grappled with the deep-rooted tensions of the land and its people. By the 1990s, a profound war weariness had set in. After years of secret talks and painstaking diplomacy, driven by figures like John Hume, and with crucial support from the Irish and British governments and the United States, a path to peace emerged. The breakthrough came with the 1998 Good Friday Agreement. This historic accord established a power-sharing government between Unionists and Nationalists in Northern Ireland. It was built on the principle of consent, that Northern Ireland's constitutional status could not change without the majority's approval. It led to an IRA ceasefire, the release of paramilitary prisoners, and police reform. Endorsed by overwhelming majorities in referendums north and south, it marked the end of the Troubles. As peace took hold in the north, the Republic of Ireland was undergoing its own radical transformation. Joining the European Union in 1973 had been a pivotal moment, but it was in the mid-1990s that the economy exploded. The Celtic Tiger boom, fueled by EU funds, low corporate taxes, and massive foreign investment, turned one of Europe's poorest countries into one of its wealthiest. This prosperity, though later hit by a severe crash in 2008, fundamentally changed the country's outlook. Even more profound was the social revolution. The once unquestionable authority of the Catholic Church crumbled under the weight of scandals and a more educated, outward-looking population. In a series of landmark referendums, the Irish people voted decisively for change. In 2015, Ireland became the first country in the world to legalize gay marriage by popular vote. In 2018, it voted to repeal its constitutional ban on abortion. These moments signaled the arrival of a new, progressive, and secular Ireland. Today, it's a global tech hub, with the European headquarters of Google, Apple, and Meta clustered in Dublin's Silicon Docks. Yet, history's shadow remains. The United Kingdom's 2016 vote to leave the European Union, Brexit, has thrown the delicate balance of the Good Friday Agreement into question. It reignited the complex issue of the border between North and South, a border that had become virtually invisible. The challenge of managing this new reality without undermining peace remains the single greatest political issue facing the island. The story of 20th century Ireland is one of staggering transformation, from a restive colony to a divided nation, through civil war and sectarian conflict, to two modern societies living side by side in a hard-won peace. From the ashes of the GPO to the gleaming tech campuses of Dublin, from ancient invasions to modern unity, Ireland's resilient, complex, and enduring spirit continues to write its next chapter. And that's the entire history of Ireland, a tapestry of triumph over tragedy. From Celtic warriors to peace accords, it's a reminder that even small nations can shape the world. We've closed our loops, from Roman what-ifs to famine's fallout, and explored tangents that add color to the canvas. What stands out? Ireland's unyielding quest for identity amid empires. Today, it's a united cultural force, north and south. Thanks for watching. If this sparked your interest, like, subscribe, and comment your favorite era. Check out our sources in the description for deeper dives. Until next time, Slaint.